Tonight, I'm really going to talk about material choices. What we're going to go over again, because it's worth repeating always, why hempcrete and hemp products have a lot of attributes to them that are amazing. But in particular, one of the ones that's very much focused on these days is especially as governments and people are talking a lot, and utility companies are talking about decarbonization, is the carbon storing ability of hempcrete in particular, or hemp products. And so I'm going to just briefly touch on that. And then there are a whole bunch of products that aren't hempcrete and aren't hemp, that are natural building products that also tick some of those boxes around carbon as well as health. And I'll briefly just go through those. There's a lot of different resources. Alan, who's on right now with us, and I both went to the Natural Building Alliance conference in the Rocky Mountain Natural Building Alliance conference in Boulder last weekend. And that was Maddie Mead from Hempitecture was there. Phelan Dalton from the Hemp Building Company in Colorado was there. So there was some hemp related folks, and then there was a lot of straw, clay, adobe, other folks. And so I'm going to go through some of those alternative materials as well. And so it's good timing. So just to revisit, this concept of, for a long time, we've been trying to solve the orange section here, the operational carbon emissions. That's a company I had for 13 years, Energia, doing building performance. And that's basically trying to get our utility bills and our fuel bills to zero. And that we can do these days very easily. I should say very easily. Not everyone's doing it, but we know how to do it. And that's basically electrification, mini splits, electric stoves, getting rid of combustion appliances, adding some type of solar or renewables, highly efficient thermal envelope and air sealing details, and you can get your operating emissions to zero. That's not the problem. Now we understand that embodied carbon, everything you put into the building right up front, is what we need to figure out. And then going back to this building operations at about 29%, and the building materials at about 11%, is somewhere around 39 or 40% of global emissions is related to the built environment. And so as we start to address that operational energy, and we reduce that as a percentage of the pie on the bottom right, the embodied energy becomes much more of an issue to try and figure out how to tackle. And so that's just, again, the context a little bit for when people talk about carbon storing materials. We don't talk about carbon sequestration, because sequestration is more like geologic time. But for a building, we talk about locking something away for a while. That's storing it for 200 to 500 years for a hempcrete building, maybe 50 years for some of the other less, let's just say, poor buildings that a lot of them are being constructed today. So the only way to lock away, lock away carbon, is to grow something where there is carbon uptake, biogenic carbon uptake. And that is not a foam or petroleum-based product. That's not even stone wool, which is mineral wool bats like Roxwool. It's not Owens Corning and CertainTeed and Knopf, all the fiberglass folks. Denim bats, the cotton reused from the clothing industry. It's a sort of like wood in a way that it's a waste byproduct, and it's not primarily harvested for that purpose. So it's sort of a byproduct, but you only get there by growing something, and that's straw, hemp, cork, other plant materials. And I always had a question about this original carbon impact graph. And so I've got this is more updated, and hempcrete comes out on top. It doesn't really matter. Straw and hemp both perform incredibly well, and pound for pound, in terms of storing carbon, net carbon storage in their use. And so let's talk a little bit about just natural building materials in general, why it is that they also have, beyond carbon storing, there's this renewable aspect, right? So this is, hemp can be grown in anywhere from 77 to 120 days, depending on the strain. Some climates you can get multiple plantings out of it. And the equivalent biomass coming off those yields for straw or hemp or jute or some of these other materials, rice hull, rice husks, coconut fiber. So the equivalent, wood biomass would take 15 to 20 years to grow in some cases. So it's just much more efficient, annually renewable. And then the other thing is, there's been a lot more attention, as Ray and Gina talked about, through COVID, of like our indoor air quality in our spaces. There are more certification schemes that are melding the health into them. USGBC used to just be about energy efficiency and a little bit of sourcing. Then there was Passive House, really hyper energy efficient, and then Living Building Challenge. And then the WELL standard came out, which is all about health. And that's now being actually integrated in 2024 with the U.S. Green Building Council LEED certification. And there are a couple other really robust health-related certification schemes that architects and builders are looking at, trying to differentiate their products. So the health side is an increasing market angle. It's also, there are some people selling on fear in this case, which is a little dangerous. And there is, I would say, out of the 25% of folks that come to us for health-related reasons, 20% of those, maybe even 5%, are really even focused on some of the harder to pin down health things like EMF, electromagnetic frequencies, and radiation, the stuff that comes off wires and 5G and all this other stuff. They're a little ahead of us in Europe in a lot of ways, not just with hempcrete, but also on, GMOs and food side. And they're also a little ahead of us on trying to understand the health effects of some of the, wireless and other technologies that are in our lives. Safer to install, absolutely, most of the time. You're not going to lick a fiberglass bat or sleep on a mineral wool bat. So we have children installing hemp bats and coming to our hempcrete workshops. It's just a much safer environment. Of course, when you're spraying hempcrete, people are pretty buttoned up, so there are exceptions. And then there are other attributes, and these are the things that don't get counted and aren't tested for at ASTM and other places, which is hempcrete's moisture storage ability, and certain other aspects of its dynamic R value, which has to do with its mass plus its R value, that aren't really, there's no tests, because other materials are not, that we use in our buildings are, all the codes are generated to try and figure out how to make sure we don't keep too much moisture or allow too much moisture for too long in our building envelopes, because most of the materials we use can't handle it, and hempcrete in particular can. So here's a few companies that are really interesting. EcoCacan has an open house on this week somewhere. It's either Saturday, in combination with Latitude and the Regenerative Real Estate people. That's a project in New York State, 10,000, almost to 12,000 square foot, vaulted. I think it's a community space of some kind. Peter Jensen, who's the U.S. arm of EcoCacan, who was also at this conference Alan and I were at, is doing his panels. Griffin Panel is a company out of is New Frameworks. Jacob Recusen and Ace McCarlton out of Vermont. They're building straw panel. Verdant is Anthony Dente, who is an engineer who was also with Ray and others and us as an engineer when we went to Rochester and got hempcrete into the building codes. So Verdant Panels out of California. Some interesting straw blocks. This guy Oliver I think he's in Portland, Oregon. He's making a really interesting compressed block that he's then putting in sometimes both sides, sometimes one side of a building, filling the cavities, as well as he's got blocks that fill cavities 24 on center, and then they have this block that kind of goes over the edge, much like Dion Lefebvre out of Alberta. He has this DeVita block. It's very similar to that. There are board products. So this is the wood fiber board products on the left, Gutex and Styco, and soon to be Timber HP. So Gutex and Styco are out of Germany, Austria. Timber HP is Maine. They're in an old paper mill in Maine. And they're also producing some other products coming out. That Timber HP, the wood fiber board from them is not available yet, but they have other bat products already available, and they just shipped some loose blown material that I'll show you in a second. Hemp board has been available. This is a more dense, not a bat, but a board product that's been available from Nature Fibers in Quebec for a long time, for 3 or 4 years at least. And Hempitecture never really did anything with that, even though they were, importing the bats from them. Now that Hempitecture is online on its own, they are now producing a board product. They are actually pursuing Class A fire ratings for their hemp board product, 2 inches. Maddie was telling us about a lot of the testing and the expensiveness of that. And they're coming out with that, I think, in January or soon, to be used as a continuous insulation product as a substitute for mineral wool, foam boards, other things. And as the codes can increasingly move towards, especially in the northern climates, a requirement for continuous insulation, these products are particularly useful, and they've already been used to a large extent on super high-end, like passive house type high-performing projects.